Are you excited about the future or are you worried? Are you expecting good things or more misery? You know, these days when we look around, it seems like the future is pretty bleak. Netflix and Hollywood keep telling us stories about dystopia. Television tells us stories about more financial decline, more climate change disasters, clueless CEOs and politicians, and of course in the end the robots will take our jobs and then they will harvest our bodies for energy. But despite all that noise, I'm here to tell you that the future is better than we think. I believe in the future where human ingenuity, science and technology will and can solve our most important problems. I believe in a future where human kindness and our ability to collaborate will win. But we're running out of time because the future is arriving faster than we think. In fact, the future is already here, we just haven't noticed. Science fiction is becoming science fact, and we are at a fork in the road. The next 10 years is going to bring more change than the previous 100 years. We must make the right decisions now if we want a good future. Hey, greetings everybody. I'm Gerd Leonhard, Futurist in Zurich, Switzerland. It's so great to be here today. This is the birthday, the giving birth, so to speak, of the Good Future Project. I've been working on the Good Future for quite some time, and the film thing that you just saw is kind of the start of it all. Last year, I went to Lanzarote, the Canary Islands, where we spent quite a bit of time, and we made this film in the middle of COVID, to say, okay, the future isn't all bad, right? The future can be good. So as part of this process, what happened in the last sort of year and a half is I figured that, we should start a kind of a movement about the good future. Because one thing that's really missing, I find today, is the concept of a narrative about the good future. Because there's so many negative things happening. If you watch Netflix or Apple TV, whatever you're watching, or BitTorrent, or whatever, right? It's mostly bad, right? The future is bad. The robots are coming. We're all going to die, climate change, and so on. So I think it's really important to create a better narrative, to have hope for the future. And so optimism, right? This is really what it's all about. So the first show today of the Good Future Project features a total of 5 people. We have one more person that came in at the very last moment. I will introduce them piece by piece, but you can see their beautiful heads here already getting ready to roll, right? So I'm going to take it away with the beginning to explain what the Good Future Project is all about, and then we'll move on to Puruesh Chaudhary, the next speaker. Hello and greetings, everybody. It's so great to have you aboard. Thanks for spending your time on the Good Future. So to tune into this, right? First, when I talk about the Good Future, a lot of people are saying, you must be joking when you speak about the good future, especially my kids, right? The future isn't good. The future is climate change. The future is, of course, wars. And the future is technological domination, right? You see a little piece of the social dilemma film here, right? So a long list of things that aren't working. And then we have, of course, other people who speak about the future, like my good friend, the UN Secretary General. Here he is.
We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands. Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty rough message, right? It's like we collaborate or we die, basically, right? So I always say dystopia is easy. It's easy to make films about the future that are like Black Mirror dystopia. And utopia is a perpetual fantasy, like the world is just going to be all roses and stuff, which is unlikely, right? So I'm with Kevin Kelly, who talks about protopia. And protopia is an important term because it means a stepwise approach towards a better future. Not a leap, but stepwise getting better. And we have been getting better stepwise. It's hard to imagine now looking at everything around us. But for example, 200 years ago, the average life expectancy was 36 years, and now it's 81, right? And we've been lots and lots of improvements here. But when we talk about protopia, right, that's when I came up with this concept for the Good Future film. And I spoke about, in the film, you can see at thegoodfuturefilm.com, about what it means to think about a good future and what it actually means. And so my first message here is that I think the good future is totally possible. And it's not an illusion. It's not utopia. Yeah, but we have to make it a priority. We have to make a better narrative, and we have to jumpstart collaboration. That's really what it comes down to. It's not that we don't have the tools. We have the tools, we have the money, we have the people, right? We have to make it a total priority. And thus, the Good Future Project came about 3 months ago. We have now something like 60 members or so. Many people on this stream will possibly also join there. And so the first question is, what is a good future, right? I use the Maslow pyramid. I would say if we can cover the bottom two and a half maybe, safety, security, food, shelter, education, right? For everybody, that's already good, right? Bottom line, good definition. Love, belonging, self-esteem, that's kind of like we can understand different things. But the bottom line is to have roughly 9 billion people, which we're going to be in 2030, to be safe, to have a right for education, to have basic liberty, civil rights, and so on. That, to me, defines a good future. And going back to this definition of what actually all of that means, right? I use this animation that we've created. It's basically 3 things, right? Technology can help us with a good future. Decarbonization, which means to go green all the way, and reforming our economic logic. And those are the 3 topics of the Good Future Project. Technology and humanity, protecting humanity while we use technology, big topic. Climate change, energy, environment, decarbonization, second big topic. And just there's a microphone on, please turn your microphone off if you would. And also new economics, right? Just the sort of next level capitalism and the things that we think about where the future is going and how we can make that happen. Now, those are very big topics. Again, going back to Kevin Kelly, he says we should be optimistic, not because our problems are smaller, but because our capacity to solve them is so much larger. That's a really good argument. That's why I have hope, because I say, okay, our capacity to solve things, right? This huge technological transformation that we have around here with all of the things that we are capable of doing, trillion-dollar innovation platforms like the blockchain and genetic engineering and so on. And of course, human genome, right? It's now basically $800 to get your genome done. It'll be $80 in a few years. We can solve major problems with this. And the most hopeful one really is the sustainability revolution that we already see all around us in energy, in protein, cultured meat, transportation, investing, and so on. All that stuff is already happening at mind-boggling pace. And to me, this is the biggest one, really, right? Is this kind of idea what's happening, climate change, climate technology, is the next 100 unicorns or so will be all in climate tech, right? So battery storage, precision agriculture, the typical forester hype curve, right, or gardener, rather. So very important here to realize that green is a new digital. And that is the ticket to our future right there, that we can make it happen. I speak about this quite a bit in my speeches, so it's a very big topic. The other one that's really tough for us is this shift, right? We're going to shift from this obsession with profit and growth, GDP, to a new agenda. And Peter speaks about that a lot too. I think most of the people on this call, on this show, will speak about this. People, planet, purpose, and prosperity, right? People, planet, profit, that's of course Elkington and others. But this is a big theme now, right? It's a corporate theme. People want to see purpose. They want to see things like this shift. I took this from Peter, actually. Thank you, Peter, for producing this. I adapted a little bit. These are the key paradigm shifts. And you take a look at those, right? It's really amazing what's happening there, right? Going from the economy, to the climate issue, from combustion engines to electric engines. And we'll make those slides available. But those are all the shifts happening essentially at the same time. Mind-boggling, all in the next decade. Right? And I think the Good Future Project will look at many of these in greater detail. So also very important for the Good Future Project, just from the beginning, we want this to be completely 50-50, male, female, developed, non-developed countries in terms of participation, with all of our members, with our events, with everything. I know that's not easy to do, because a lot of people who are in the business of thinking about the future are like me, and now we got to find more people. So it's really great to have more diversity. We're making a big effort on this, so please let us know how we're doing on this. The project is also influenced by Buckminster Fuller, who wrote a great book called This Spaceship Earth, right? And he says whether it is to be utopia or oblivion will be touch and go until the final moment. He says that humanity is in a final exam, as we're going to continue to exist or not. He said that, of course, in 1971. Right? So Buckminster Fuller, a pretty amazing comment, you know, and he also said this, right? We are to be called architects of the future, not victims. And this is really what the project is all about, creating a positive scenario, positive narrative, and to architect our future, to impact what people are thinking about the future. I had this message quite a bit in my talks, right? The future is better than we think. Right? We just have to make sure we put the right steps in place to actually realize it. But we have all the tools, right? Now we need the telos, the wisdom. Great quote here by Barbara Hubbard, right? Fellow futurist who just last year passed away, rest in peace. As we see the future, so we act, and as we act, so we become. Right? The future belongs to optimists. That's been my conviction for quite some time, and I'll just share that with you. So to wrap it all off, great quote I found from an American poet: "Our attitude contains our future." That is just so important to remember. And that's a key narrative of the Good Future Project. So that wraps up my fast turbo drive presentation here for this. Now, let's go back to the other speakers. I would like to introduce Puruesh Chaudhary. Yeah, I'm getting it. She's a futures researcher focused on strategic narrative. She's in Islamabad, Pakistan. She is a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Strategic Studies there, the founder and president of the Pakistan Foresight Initiative. She wrote the Future of Pakistan report 2016. I mean, she wrote it now, it's about 2060. And she is also a great champion of the future of journalism, has co-founded several initiatives there, the Agahi Awards. She's a global shaper for the World Economic Forum, an Aspen alumni. She's a member of the World Future Society. It's a long list, so she's totally accomplished. And now here's the question to you, Puruesh, is what gives you hope about the future? What is the world like in Pakistan right now? What do you see as important? And, you know, is the good future real, or is it a pipe dream?
Thanks, Gerd. And so it's great to be on a platform that really talks about the good future. And as scenarists, we're sort of engaged in sort of developing all sorts of futures. And mostly I feel that what really makes it life much more easier when we're very pessimistic about how the world is going to turn out to be. And somehow we shy away from using vocabulary like really that demonstrates the good future. So, you know, while I needed to really do this talk, I had to really think a little harder. I mean, what is it sometime when I'm sitting in few of the meetings, not just in Pakistan, but in other places of the world, and when those meetings are very futures driven, what do I often find missing and what do I often really bring up? And I often sort of think to myself, like, if I'm sitting with people who are within the age brackets of 50 to 60-year-old, and if the total if 16% of the total global population is between the age of 15 to 24, that's almost over a billion young people. Now if you have over a billion young people, when we're designing or thinking or co-creating about the future, I mean, whose world are we going to, or whose imagination are we going to convert into reality? And so in this context, what makes me hopeful is that we really have to really create the environment and the conditions that would really make these 15 to 24-year-old sort of live their dreams and their sort of imagination. So a lot of our thinking and our aspiration on and the way we function has to come out from the perspective of how we're creating the world for people who are 14 or 15-year-old today. And so with that, and one of the reason I say this, because a huge part of how we shape the agenda and the sort of conditions that we design largely depend on how we think and what our past experience has been and what our domain speciality. In the current times, the shift away from this and really focusing on the hopes and aspiration and dreams of the young people, I think will make us move in the sort of a good future that your platform sort of envisage in its entirety. Now, having said that, the reason I say that in the current environment, I think the region that I'm part of, Asia, and sort of say particularly Pakistan, around more than 50% of the country's population is under the age of 25. Now, when you have such a young population, how Pakistan looks to the world, and that largely has been captured by how the last 20 years been. The last 20 years, we've actually been looking at, Pakistan has been looked at from the prism of its participation on global war and terror. Now, while this has been happening, a lot of young people are born amidst in the last 20 years. And they have a very different perception and different ideas of how we need to move the country forward. In some way, I tried to capture that in the Pakistan State of Future Index work that we did. And what we learned from the exercise, we did 2 editions. And what we learned from the exercise is that there are a lot of young girls who the way they perceive the country in the next 10 years, and they're quite hopeful. So they have a very positive outlook, positive outlook about the country's future. Now, if I shift the generation and if I go to a very different demographic, the way they perceive the country's future is entirely different. And I can imagine that it comes from the current understanding of the reality and the conditions that they're in, but shaping a sort of a narrative. I think for a country like Pakistan, a lot of this really would come from really taking into consideration how young people view the future of the country. So in the current scenario, Pakistan's political landscape is always like in a state. It's very unstable, but I think the politics around the world are going through, and so you sort of in a very dicey situation. So sometimes if I were to close my eyes and sort of imagine, so the world is moving, the people are moving in one direction, and the entire moving in the completely opposite direction. And this is something that in your presentation as a starting, I sort of heard that I sort of resonated with my current understanding. So I feel that if we were to move forward, we need to really understand whose imagination are we going to be shaping in terms of our current reality. And whether when we talk about digitization, decarbonization, reformation, how we need to create an equity among different countries, which is very important in terms of shaping the sort of condition in which these young kids can actually live up to their aspiration. So workshops around the country, I think giving that sense of awareness about how to project that good narrative, I think is essential. And we sort of hope that this platform can play that role. Thanks, Gerd. I think this is it, and then maybe we take questions. Yeah.
No, great. Thanks, Puruesh. I mean, I think one of the key topics of the project is to say that a good narrative is so important for younger people. You know, I have 2 kids, they're 26 and 33, and I just find that a lot of their friends and so their view of the future is kind of like, okay, it's all messed up, right? And that's just not good. And that needs to change. And I think that narrative needs to change also from saying, oh, all these problems is like, what about all the potential, right? And this is, of course, a cultural thing as well. But let's talk more about your country and your region a little bit later in the conversations. Let's go over to Peter Leyden. Peter Leyden is a friend from Berkeley, California, where I used to live as well. He's a thought leader. Hello, Peter. On the future and new technologies with writing and reading. A great recent post that you must read is called The Great Progression. I think we have a link here in the caption. We can put that in. The Great Progression. I think it's on Big Think, right? He's a senior advisor and a coach to leaders. His company Reinvent Futures, and host and convener of innovations, most recently at the Long Now Foundation, a long-term think tank, and former editor of Wired magazine, author, and all-around bright guy. And you know, the other day we reconnected. It was really amazing to see how much overlap we have with the messaging that has developed in parallel between my work and his work and the work of many others. So Peter, over to you. Your sound? Are you on mute? There you go. Okay, good. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited. I've spent my entire career trying to restructure a more positive narrative about the future, honestly. So I totally love what you're trying to do here with this, the Good Future Project. There's no question about it. Yeah, there are some slides here. I just wanted to kind of talk about a little bit as we're talking here. Because 25 years ago, I was at the original Wired magazine. I was kind of working with the founders there, and we were trying to kind of breathe life into what people at that time could not understand what was happening with these new digital technologies, these new computers, this new internet. Everyone didn't know what these goofy startups were going to be all about. So we had to kind of try to breathe life into, hey, how is this digital economy going to work? How is this globalization with the fall of the Soviet Union? How when we knit the world together, what was that going to do? And so basically myself and another prominent futurist at the time, Peter Schwartz, created a kind of cover story in Wired, later went into a book, went into a bunch of languages, that was trying to breathe life into those next 25 years. And the thing is, you can actually project out using kind of trending and all the different tools of strategic foresight to actually look at that future world, which we did. And it largely actually played out. We told the story from the mid-90s to the 2020, and how many positive things were going to happen as we knit this world together. And this is the world now that we've all kind of seen behind. So basically just this last year, and the anniversary of kind of coming up on this kind of projection of the future, I was asked by Big Think, as you mentioned there, Gerd, to actually think about the next 25 years, but to think of it through my kind of trademark positive lens of like, why, what is it that I see happening that could roll out in the next 25 years to the world, basically to 2050. Getting us to that point. And honestly, I think there's all kinds of positive developments that we're not noticing now, or they're downplaying now, or they're getting kind of squished out or pushed out because of all the negativity around us in terms of the media. But I also don't think people have the tools to actually systematically think about the future and see all the very positive things that are coming out there. And so basically what I'm kind of thinking about as I think about why is it that people basically see things so negatively. And I think one of the ways to think about this is the system, which is made up of all kinds of the last 40 years. There's been a mega system, and there's been all these subsystems in that system. And that system across all these little subsystems and the mega system is breaking down. It's not working, our kind of, we had this huge challenge of terrorism. We had energy was all around carbon. We had the transportation was all internal combustion. Culture was the baby boomer centric. This is a little bit through the lens of the West, but America here, but politics is more conservative. We unleashed the private sector. We were all about shareholder value, physical work, not virtual work, industrial production, which is a lot of pollution and things. And the geopolitics from the lens of the West, I'm thinking, was also focused on the Middle East. The thing is, that world is going away. That world is dying. That world is going through death throes. But all the media and all the politicians have been living in that world for 40 years. So they're kind of seeing the end game of this thing. Meanwhile, if you think about it, every one of those categories has all these new systems. They're nascent systems that are starting to come into getting traction. They're starting to kind of become, but they're not clearly understood. They're not clearly developed even. So now we're shifting the world to this idea of we have to solve climate change. Terrorism is like, at this stage, that's like minor compared to what we got with climate change. But also, we got to shift to clean energy. That's already well happening. We got to move to electric mobility. Look what's happening. The entire auto industry is now shifting to electric mobility. The culture is driven more by young people, as the previous speaker was just speaking about. We actually have a very different culture. Basically, the politics, I would argue, is shifting now into more progressive. We're getting more into the public sector. This is, again, through the lens of the West, but we're shifting back to a thing that happened after World War II. We're thinking about everybody, the stakeholders in capitalism. We're basically moving work to virtual. We're biological production, which is genetic engineering and kind of synthetic biology. And ultimately, our geopolitics from, again, the Western point of view is moving more to Asia and all the huge populations there and how we have to solve climate change. But again, this is a great, but this world is not fully understood. So what's happening now, and I think this is a big part of the kind of despair and the gloom and doom out there, is this one world is, I think of that old world is on one side of the cliff, and the new world isn't fully kind of understood and fully developed on the other side. And we happen to be living in the decade where we got to make that jump. I spent a lot of time talking to senior leaders and CEOs and boards and all kinds of people trying, and leaders of our organizations, not just companies, foundations, philanthropies, trying to wrap their heads around this is what's happening in the 2020s. And I think it's really resonating with people there. Now, the positive thing is that there's so many things that are trajectory for the next 25 years that we can work on that are just going to be awesome. Universal connectivity, these are the inexorables. There are trends and technologies that are just going to happen under any scenario of our future, and many of them are positive. For example, we still have 3 billion people who are not on the internet right now, and that this decade will be connected. We will absolutely have everyone connected there. We are going to have AI, which is like a superpower in many ways. There's people worried about the dangers of it, but there's all these positive things. We're watching all kinds of things, the clean energy developments I just described to you, this genetic understanding and our kind of ability to manipulate genetics to kind of essentially create materials and things that could never have happened before. Gerd made some reference to that. Unbelievably good. We're watching new majorities kind of form here in the world all around the planet. Now, that is a thing that's happening in kind of across the entire world. There's also some what I would call global inexorables. These are less about the technologies, but more trends. We are watching, there is so much capital out there now. People think, hey, do we have the capital to shift from what is now about $1 trillion right now is going into clean energies? We need about $4 trillion a year. There's plenty of capital out there. There's a bunch of ways to talk about that. China is now a superpower rather than kind of a very much of a developing nation. They're doing incredible amount to push the climate push there. And this is the other thing I think that people underappreciate all over the world is the fact we're moving people into cities. For the first time in human history, about 10 years ago, more people lived in cities than abroad. And now that's going to continue to about 70 or 80% by 2050. That is much better for the environment, but also much better for economic development throughout the world. This is the other thing that's happening. As of now, half the world is middle class or better. Now, a global middle class kind of standard of refrigerators and scooters and all the things that basically are core middle class. It might not be the entire standard of a Western middle class, but it's basically we've got most people now, solid foundation. That's going to increase by about 1.7 billion by 2030. They're saying we're going to have a lot more people in this more stable, thriving, prosperous middle class. And ultimately, I think this is great for women as we're going to actually see a much more an equalization of the sexes over the next 25 years. I think there's so many things to be positive about this world. We are going to solve climate change, and we're going to ride it on many of these positive trends. So with that, I would say be happy rather than, or not be happy, because it's not utopia. But in fact, we have a lot more to be thinking about of why the future could be much better than people currently think of it is. And with that, I'll get it back to the group here.
I mean, it's becoming clear to me over the time of the discussion that our view from the developed world really is one side of the coin. The other one is what's happening in the less developed world. When I speak to people at different places, we should definitely talk about that and what the good future entails for that. We're gonna move on to Dr. Nisreen Laham from Cairo. She's one of the world's top female futurists, an expert in Web Nexus, foresight and project management. She's an expert on international water management. That's one of her main topics. And she's worked on water food security, development of cities, city planning. She's the founder of the Future Studies Forum for Africa and executive manager at the Egyptian Cabinet's Information and Decision Support Center in Cairo. Thanks very much for jumping in so quickly on such short notice, especially with the chaotic traffic in Cairo. Glad you made it back to the wherever you can speak. So over to you. What is your take on the good future, and what's your current situation where you are?
Thank you, Gerd. Actually, it's a great pleasure to join you and this fantastic team thinking about the future in a positive form and to be optimistic. Actually, in the Arab region, we say if you have positive expectations about the future, about anything, so then it's most probably that you will get what you aim for. So we have to be optimistic. In my short intervention, I will talk about the future of the MENA region, which I belong to. The MENA region faces great challenges right now in meeting the great demand for water, food, and energy. And this is driven by major two trends in the region. On the demand side, the high rate of population growth and it's expected that in 2050 we'll have 723 million people resided in the region, and the other trend is a high rate of rapid urbanization. And it's expected that by 2050, we'll have 68% of the people resided in cities, which is a really high percent. This put burden on the increased demand for water, energy, and food. And on the supply side, for the energy sector, for example, although 43% of the world oil reserves are in the region with immense potential for renewable energy, we have still 35 million people with no access to electricity. And if we have projections with the business as usual, this will increase by 80% to 80% in 2050. Regarding the water issue, the MENA region is the most water scarce region in the world, with less than 500 cubic meter per person per year, which is really a low number, with some countries more than this, the less quantity of per capita water quantities. And this also have implications on food security, considering that 32% of the people in the region face food insecurity, and this is projected to increase to 60% in 2050. This challenge is also exacerbated by the climate change impacts, which we are all experiencing now in the region, with the higher temperature, the high sea level rise, the more drought, the floods which we experience nowadays, which also have implications on the water security. So if we have a look at the region now, and if we look at the future from the current perspective, MENA region is falling short in achieving the SDGs and the NDCs. As for the energy, renewable energy is less than 5% of total energy consumption, including biomass, which is really a very small percentage. The region is also behind in reducing energy-related greenhouse gas emissions and achieving net zero by 2030. This is a real challenge for the region. And now, as you know, we are in the preparation phase for COP27. Actually, next week we'll be traveling to Sharm el-Sheikh. I will be personally participating in sessions on the transformation of agri-food systems in relation to climate change, how we can transform our food production, food consumption in relation to these challenges. So the next slide, please. So these challenges, especially on energy, are related to climate change, the most impressive challenge we have. We need to move to circular economy approach. We need to use our byproducts. We need to make use of our also cities, how we can produce more energy from cities, how we can produce food also in cities, not just in rural areas. We need to embed technology in the region, which is really a great challenge, especially the green hydrogen, which needs investments. And how we need to have these investments from the private sector, but also we need to have this enabling environment created by the governments and the public sector on policies, regulations, incentives for private sector to get engaged in these new technologies. We have also to adopt some new form of governance, maybe through some tools like the Internet of Things, blockchain, to have this open market between the consumer of energy and the producer and distributor of energy. But this is not an easy way to go through. So next, please. So we have a long way to go through to have this a good future for the MENA region, but I believe it is possible. We have many tools to build on, and we have the most important thing: the human capital. We have the people. We have the youth with these innovations that they have, that they can shape the future. They can create the future we look for. We have to build on three main pillars, I believe. First of all, collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. with the civil organizations, for the non-governmental organizations, with the financial institutions also. The North-South collaboration, having the technology embedded in the MENA region, for example. And the South-South collaboration also benefiting from the successful stories, from the best cases that they were implemented in the South countries. We have to share these experiences and share this knowledge for the benefit of the region. We have to make use of technology. Technology will change the shape of the world. As Gerd mentioned in this short video, the 10 coming years will create change much more than the past 100 years. We have to be prepared for this. We have to have the technology. We have to adopt this technology, to have investments to make them real in our lives. They can solve many problems, especially the access to the main resources for water, energy, and food. We can transform the way we produce our food, how we can use our resources in a much better and a much intelligent way with no byproducts, how we can have alternative water resources, alternative energy resources, how we can have different forms of crops that they are tolerant for high temperature, for drought, how we can allocate our resources. So the technology will help us in solving our problems. But it's not only solving our problems, it's having a better future for our children, for our dreams. We have to think of the future on the future. It's not a dream. It's thinking of the future in a scientific way, or in a realistic way. It's a dream, but a realistic dream that could happen on ground for our future children. But what we do nowadays, currently, to achieve this dream? So this is a point, to use the future in taking the decisions nowadays in our current life. What we have to do, what is our responsibility for children, for this good future. The third component that we have to work on is humanity. We have not to forget that we are human beings. We have not just to fulfill our basic needs. We have to live happily in this life. We have to live happily and for the good of the environment and good for the planet. Not to have to be dragged by technology that is the only way for our prosperity in the future. And maybe I can end with a very short story we tell our children sometimes. It's maybe not, it's optimistic or not, I don't know if it's encouraging them, but one day a man was passing by a lazy man laying under the tree. So he told him, "What are you doing?" He told him, "I'm laying under the tree." He told him, "Why don't you go and work?" He told him, "Why should I work?" "To get money." "So why should I get money?" "To bring nice clothes and to eat decently." "So why should I get all this? Why should I eat decent food? Why should I dress neatly and good way? Why should I do all these things to have a good house, to have a good wife, to have a good life?" So I told him, "To be happy." So the man laying under the tree said, "But I'm happy. I'm already happy." So we have not to forget that we are humans. We have needs and we have to live happily on our planet. We have to make use of the technology, of collaboration, of all tools we have, but to put in mind, we have to be the ones that we master this planet. We must master the environment, master our lives on this planet, and to be optimistic, as Gerd mentioned. Thank you again, Gerd, and looking for any also questions or interventions. Thank you.
Okay, shukran, Nisreen. That's really good stuff. We're going to hear from you about COP27. I do have high hopes for this event, and that the good future can materialize there as well. I'm probably more optimistic than most people about the COP meetings, but let's see what happens. Just yesterday, I was rewarded with my optimistic thinking when the wrong person lost in Brazil the election, in my view. So I'm very encouraged with the outcome of the election in Brazil, even though Brazil is not an easy country to govern, that's for sure. Let's see what happens there. But anyway, next time we'll have somebody from Brazil that was the plan. This time didn't work out. So now we're going to go to Chavi Jadvani. She is from India, from Delhi, calling in from Delhi right now, but lives in Bologna, Italy, probably for the food. But she works at the intersection of innovation and sustainability in the food sector. Very, very hot topic. I do a lot of work in food myself, and she looks at food system design challenges. She works for strategic projects for Nestle, Dole, and many other ones. And her mission is to contribute to a global food system that shifts from extractive to regenerative. So over to you. What's your take on the good future?
Hi, everyone. Hi, thanks, Gerd. Can you hear me okay? It's my...
Yes, you're there.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. So I am, for one, very, very much of a believer in narratives and the power of narratives. Like, if you haven't read the book Narrative Economics, really powerful. So I love talking here about narratives of the good future. I'm also part of an organization called Food for Climate League that does exactly that. How do we reshape the narratives around sustainability and climate change in a way that it's positive and it actually makes people feel like it's a party that we want to go to and not really an apocalypse that we're running away from. So I love that we're having this conversation today. And a lot of my everyday life is spent thinking about what is the good food future? What is an abundant future look like? Is it food growing everywhere around us, from urban to peri-urban areas? Is it delicious food? Is it nutritious food? Is it happy farmers? Is it what is this picture of the future that we're painting? And my answer is, of course, all of the above. But in specifically thinking about our ecological balance. So I'm a designer, and we were taught like good design is one that value to people's lives. It is human-centered, it is user-centered, is it consumer-centered? So you're really improving the life of a human being, and that is what good design is. But today we are experiencing a paradigm shift in which design thinking, which is a proponent of human centricity, it's not enough. It's not enough to just think about humans, but we have to think about another super important stakeholder, which is our planet, our planetary home. And how can we design for human centricity in a way that maintains the ecological balance? So that is really the work that we're doing with prosperity thinking. So I'm also really enjoying the keywords that I'm seeing in these presentations and what Gerd you already presented. What does a prosperity-centered world look like? So that really starts by empathizing with the nature, reestablishing our relationship with nature. Like, up till now, we've been extracting from nature, using nature for our benefit. If you pick up any product out there in the world, it has been extracting material from our ecological systems and not necessarily giving back, if not making it worse. So it's not, when we think about sustainability, we are often thinking about a notion of doing less harm, but now we are going beyond that, and we're talking about regeneration and regenerative design and regenerative economies that are not just doing less harm or fixing the mistakes that we are going to make, but trying to regenerate the planet in our process. And there were some really good examples here mentioned in this call already. So how do we plan to create this good future, right? So the work that I do is a lot around creating pathways for multi-stakeholder collaboration, multi-stakeholder collaborative innovation, let's say, that is regenerative in nature. So there are a lot of keywords there which I have to break down. I think, as you've been saying, Gerd, as well, like the first keyword is collaborative. We can't build the future alone. It's not a one-man job. So it requires different actors to work together, mull over ideas together, co-create, co-design, and to make this future happen for it, that is positive for it, for people and the planet both. So how do we, what are these pathways of collaborative innovation, collaborative design, collaborative change? What do they look like? The second keyword there was innovation. So to build a future that sustains all its beings' needs, we need to get imaginative with what we have. We need to get creative with what we have. Nature is abundant, but at the same time, our Earth, our planetary home, has its own budget in a way. So how do we innovate within what we already have? So these projects are aimed at innovating and designing new solutions for impact. And the third keyword, as I was saying, is regenerative. We cannot just stop at sustainability. We need to break this toxic cycle of damaging and fixing. So this is how we can act on this future. And why I truly have hope for good future is because I have never more than before today have seen so many learning opportunities for young people, for people of all ages really, that have been engaging with these issues, even from small or big. Even if you look at from an entertainment perspective, Netflix today is a great platform to learn about our food systems, our ecological systems. There are so many documentaries out there. People are innovating in pedagogy, people are innovating in online education models, and there are so many people, like already in 5 years I have seen a myriad of training programs around sustainability that came out. And already in the work that we do at Future Food, we see every day a lot of intergenerational programming around the topic of climate change and sustainability, and young people excited to create this future. So I'm pretty sure we are on the good path, seeing all these people activating their agency, learning about entrepreneurship, and acting at their own local level on these issues. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Chavi. Great. Okay, so one of these days we're going to have a session on food and agriculture and stuff. We'll invite you back for that one. That's one of the key topics. The other day, I think it was a couple of years ago, I was in California doing a session for the CIA. Not that CIA, but the California Institute of Culinary Arts, and we tasted cultured meat, from the lab, and I couldn't tell the difference. I mean, I was eating this $2,000 a kilo, meat from the lab, and it was amazing. I think that all that stuff is really changing everything. So, great. Before we go into the discussion, a quick reminder for everybody that's watching out, the millions of people out there. Don't forget to go to TheGoodFutureProject.com and sign up for news, and also sign up as a supporter for the project. We need to grow the project in a sustainable way, of course. So please do sign up. Any internal questions or follow-ups from the other speakers to the other speakers? Yeah, anybody? Otherwise, we take a question from the audience. As a reminder to the audience, you can type your question into YouTube and LinkedIn, and we'll bring it out here. If we like the question, it's going to be brought straight into the stream. So let's take the first question, unless there's an internal comment, and we can debate. Right? So, how can we enable inclusion of voices among the extremely poor? Even if they have a smartphone, the cost of connectivity is excluding them. Who wants to jump on this? Come on, guys, don't be shy. I know you're not shy.
I'll jump in on that one. Oop. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think what's underappreciated right now is with Starlink, and there's a bunch of low level satellite going across the world here, in that we are going to be able to touch every region of the world with high bandwidth. That's one thing. We also know that the costs of these smartphones are, keep getting driven down, and certainly the basic functionality will be quite cheap throughout the course of this decade. So I think whether it's affordability of the extreme, like people, the extreme poor are under $2 a day. They're not going to be able to buy a smartphone. But it seems to me that over the course of this decade that we will be able to actually almost give these things for the good of humanity, but also the good of kind of for climate change reasons, all kinds of stuff. That I do actually think that this connectivity issue of bringing people into that basic thing is huge. The other thing I would just say, one last thing, is I think what's happening now with AI is getting close enough that this decade we will have simultaneous language translation for anyone. You don't have to have an educated elite to be talking the lingua franca of English here. I think these people who are really on the bottom end, extreme poverty, and will be able to actually communicate and hear and learn and do everything else across languages in ways that are going to be technology enabled. So I think there's a lot of things that technology can help in that way. And I think there's a lot of kind of human-centered things of, hey, let's get everyone online for the good of everybody, but also it's a win-win for the whole planet. So anyhow, I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism on that.
Let's hear the developing world. That's one of you guys.
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, following on what has been mentioned on inclusiveness and involving everybody, leaving no one behind, there are many initiatives in the MENA region For example, for the smallholder farmers, they have their mobiles and they have applications on their mobiles telling them how to irrigate the plants, how much they have to irrigate, how much fertilizers they have to provide. So these IT tools, these mobiles, that have provided them with a high level of connectivity and using them in their common days. And this they are conserving resources. They are doing better in their business, even though it's small business. It's a win-win, as has been mentioned. And these technologies have been able really to connect smallholder farmers, which really are vulnerable people. Even for women and gender inclusiveness in these projects, many projects are considering the gender transportive approach with these technologies, that they can have access to what's going in the region, how they can, for example, for farmers, how they can sell their products without intermediaries. So it's a technology that can be connect them even in a good way for their benefit, and it's really doing well on ground with the grassroots initiatives in the region.
Yeah, just one quick comment from me. I've proposed a few times when I speak about this topic that we should have a digital dividend. You know, we should make the benefit of technology give to everyone, even if they don't live in San Francisco or if they're not a member of one of those illustrious companies in San Francisco. We should take the money that's being produced by online advertising, by digital data, by computing, and give a public dividend to those that need it most. Just like I'm in favor of saying, okay, if you have to go to Lisbon to experience the culture there, we should probably have a culture tax that is paid back to people so that they can actually still live there, right? So I think a digital dividend is a solution that says, okay, from all that money, you know, Facebook, for example, makes $150 million profit every single day. Just a small dividend from that given to people who can't go online or who can't even have clean water, or, you know, that would go a long way. And I think we really need to think about this kind of idea to pay back to the ones that are the users. Keep in mind that most of the users of social media, and the biggest growth is in Africa, India, Indonesia, Brazil, right? It's not in Europe. And so, I mean, Facebook's audience in outside of the US, I think, is about 70% of where they make their money, right? So a digital dividend is something I think we should think about. Anybody else want to jump on this, or another question? Okay, other question. Let's bring another question. The question is, how do we, thank you, Mark, how do we change values from profit to well-being? Well, that is a good question. I'm going to pass this on to, Good.
Yeah, I feel like being situated, so being an Indian, but being situated in Italy, I feel like it's both of them in some ways are value-driven countries. Italy also is very much of a value-driven economy. And most of the Mediterranean, if you look at the concepts of the Mediterranean, it's a lot around well-being and conviviality and family and lifestyle. And up till now, we didn't realize that was actually a mindset that we might be looking at for the future, right? Like, how do you get people to experience this this alternative way of living, which was exactly, I love that story that was shared by someone on the call today, because also in India we use that story and that example that the man sleeping under the tree was perfect. He didn't have to necessarily go through that entire, ambitious life change to be happy. So education is a big piece, but I feel that narratives and how do we make it sexy to not want a 401k? How do we make it sexy to live on a beach on $500, but you have everything you need around you, so you probably don't need the $5,000? And so I feel a lot of it is marketing, narrative, culture reshaping, as well as education. Like being in a developing country, I know what it means to grow up with a narrative which is all around ambition, competition, being better, and always looking for what's better out there and never living in the present moment. And there's a huge sort of mental health related movement as well that is improving and changing that. So I'm actually seeing a lot of signs that we can be optimistic and positive about in terms of new growth narratives, which are more prosperity centered and not necessarily GDP driven.
Well, maybe to add to that, you can say that in some ways, maybe people who are sometimes not as much connected have a more offline luxury life, which is kind of a strange thing to say, because it's weird that people who are not connected, they want to connect as much as possible. And then when you are really connected, you want to disconnect as much as possible, right? So I always say offline is a new luxury. And to me, that has to do with well-being, to be just human without necessarily always getting the data feed and going back to this. There's actually a name for this now. I thought about that earlier. It's called nature deficit disorder. It's people who spend too much time with devices, right? And that may not be much of an issue in a place where you can't connect, obviously, because temptation would be much harder to get, right? So I don't know, what's that like in Pakistan, for example? I mean, do people feel like they are underserved with connectivity, or do you have that similar problem of people getting addicted to technology?
So you see, it's like more of like a mixed bag situation. In Pakistan, when you're moving from one city to the next, the context shifts dramatically. And when the context shifts dramatically, you would almost sense the overall understanding of what national politics are, or what does connectivity means. That also changes. So there are organizations in the country that are working towards providing or expanding access as a whole, and so they've been in the last 2-3 democratic transitions. Um, uh, um, Digital Pakistan has been quite heavy on the policy agenda, and that has been something which has been one of the in the previous political party, it was one of the most critical policy instrument in terms of galvanizing a whole bunch of young Pakistani to come into the entrepreneurial space. And so, when you have almost roughly over 10,000 young people turning 18 every day in a country, you can sort of imagine the sort of monstrous stuff, not just in terms of connectivity, but also opportunities. And so sometimes, when you're here in Pakistan, what I feel that there is some deep sense of histories attached. There is this whole idea, so we're fluctuating between parts of us being civilizational and parts of us living in the Westphalian construct, and somewhere in transition we're trying to also manage within the global affairs and the schemes of things. So there are and not to forget, culture plays a huge role. I mean, I don't in Asia, culture is it's perhaps one of those it's one of those dominating trends that really shapes our behavior, that really shapes our understanding, that really conditions us to really look after what our traditions are, what our norms are, and therefore they are usually the ones really forcing our understanding of what is the potential future that we would want. And sometimes, like most countries and most organizations or most cities, we get lost in translation, and that degree of that 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 whole sense of how lost one can be, that sort of gets reflected in global media. And so when you see that, but however, when you move around in different communities, the stories are very different, the narratives are very different. So if you would allow one dominant narrative to shape one's understanding about what the entire country is, I think that's where the deep flaw comes in, that's where a lot of misunderstanding comes in, and that's where we have conflict in our conversation, the space for less negotiation and less collaboration. And I think as foresight practitioners and researchers, much of our effort and energy goes into bringing people together rather than dividing people. So which is why I feel that three elements are very important in terms of really understanding how change occurs and what would be the key driver for those change. Technology is a great enabler, but also it can also be a great divider at the same time. But as I say this, three things are essential. For Asian context, I think three things are quite essential. Number one, we need to understand there are some places that have a very civilizational way of looking at their future. Culture is something which is very which is an undercurrent theme that runs through most of the conversation. And thirdly, there is a deep understanding of what our history is all about. So these three things, I think, if put into context, moving away from profit to well-being can be a transition, and we see that transition in certain demographic, at least in Pakistan.
Yeah, I'm an optimist on this. I think we're seeing that transition everywhere now. The millennials are coming in, and they were utterly shocked and destroyed by COVID, I think, in many ways, like, people between, say, 23 and 35 or so. And now they're coming in with a force and saying, we want a better world. We don't just want to go back. We want to do it differently. And this is, keep in mind, people my age and Peter's age, and generally the older generation, the boomers, they're moving out of the decision-making process. And millennials are coming in, and women are coming in. Look what's happening with elections around the world, except for, maybe, pretty much everywhere. Colombia, Brazil, right? New Zealand, of course, that is all a great example, and other places. Women and young people are coming in. And I think we're going to see a value shift coming from this, and it'll be brutal for some of the companies in the next decade, being subjected to millennials coming in and changing the game. And that gives me great hope that, we can, you always say millennials are, they don't want to move, they're lazy and so on. I don't believe it. I think they just need to come out a little bit more. And they haven't really had their chance. And it's been kind of, it's a strange thing when you look at the younger kids. They are digital natives. They've never known, in most countries at least, any time where they were not online, where they weren't connected. But the millennials, they have known that, right? They know a little bit of my world. They know a little bit of the other world. And now this is a huge change process. I think the research shows roughly in 5 years, most of the leading positions around the world in the industry will be done with at least 55% or so by millennials. And you can see that already happening in Turkey, for example, when you go to meetings in Turkey in the banking or insurance, right? They're all women between 30 and 45 who run everything. Right? You wouldn't expect that from Turkey, but it's pretty amazing. So I see great hope there for that value change to occur. Let's take another question. And we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes because I know I've been keeping for a long time. Right? So question, is there a low-tech component to the good future? Yeah, highly influenced by fictional entertainment media. Yeah, that is a, yeah. I'm not going to speak about that. I'll leave that to you guys, and then I'm going to chime a little bit later. Anybody?
Sorry, Gerd, very quickly. And I think that's so fascinating that, Lisa has come up with low tech. And I'm just going to talk very briefly. So there is a sort of movement in Pakistan where young people are really going up north, experiencing the nature, and they wouldn't care if they're disconnected. And here's a place where there is almost zero to very low connectivity, and they'd be disconnected from the families over 2 weeks or 3 weeks, given the amount of, and so there is this in their imagination, I'm assuming, that experience and that close relationships is playing a fundamental role in how they also experience a sense of well-being. So their sense of well-being is not really technology driven. Their sense of well-being is in human connections. So I think it may be different for different countries, but at least what I see in Pakistan, that is a low-tech component is pretty much part of the good future. And nature. And you mentioned nature deficit disorder. That's something I think many young people are actually changing.
Yeah, nature is obviously a key part of the good future because we're part of nature. And going back to nature, I think that's going to be so crucial without not using technology. It's not an antidote. It's basically a balance question, right? These days, you see a lot of people who have more relationships with their screens than they have with other people. And I think that is definitely detrimental. Also, when we think about the fake world that's forming within the sort of Netflix bubbles or Black Mirror, or of course the metaverse, right? It's at the world where the real world sucks, so we go off to a virtual world, right? And that's kind of what Zuckerberg wants us to believe, that his world is going to be so nice and beautiful. You can be anything you want, and you don't have to have a body anymore. Right? Anyway, I think that's a very, very big topic. Also, a key topic of the Good Future Project is to say, how do we protect humanity? How do we protect the traditional, the indigenous, the things that are part of us without being intermediated by some device? Any other comments? Yeah, no? You'll be tempted for this. I think we all agree on this. So, okay, so final question, okay? So question for the panel, how do you feel we can all make these positive energies more visible? Should we focus more on SD17 and even transcend the SDGs to fast-forwarding developments? I'll take a quick answer, and then all of you should make a final comment on this. My comment on this is all great stuff. I love what the UN is doing, the SDGs, even the World Economic Forum, they all do little pieces of their thing. I think what is missing is a global narrative that gets a good story out there, gets people hopeful, that produces media, that is a mainstream of what people are tapping into. That is what's missing. Take away the technology conversation from the tech companies, put it into the public space, the civil space, right? Talk about what democracy does with create a positive story and get our young people excited to be part of that future. As Buckminster Fuller, that we're supposed to be architects, not consumers or victims of the future. I think this is really, all these organizations are doing great work, but the narrative is too weak, and that needs to change. Okay, your final comment now. This is your chance. Yep. Okay, I'm listening.
Okay, I just go really quickly.
Well, yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll give you very briefly. So we're working with few philosophers out of Lahore. And, when you talk about how do you make this positive and how do you bring this all together? So their whole foundation of their philosophical work is how do you move the human mind from being rather stuck in the very technicalities to becoming nature-centric. So a lot of their work is around, what they call their work is evolutionary mentology. So it's very much aligned with how nature is and what the evolution process looks like. So I feel as many people, like we have gotten together to make this thing happen. And then I feel that many people are doing this on their own, like whether it's the SDG or, for instance, part of the Millennium Project, and we look at the global challenges in a very different context altogether. So there are efforts and movement where this is happening.
All right. Peter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Peter.
Hey, I've been a long time. I've been advocating for what I call blue sky sci-fi, and that I actually think the challenge now is, you're right on it, Gerd, is basically we need to see a positive narrative of how the future is going to go and how it's going to work for everybody for the long haul, and that and I think there is actually an appetite for this. And I think there's early signs that you're starting to see this. And I think with the explosion of streaming, or the ability now with Netflix and others to kind of, you can accommodate a lot more kind of points of view and a lot more kind of content, essentially. And I really feel that there's an opening here for what this more positive ways of thinking about the future. And I think there's a lot of people that are really attracted to that. There's also a little sub movement, which is not so much in the media world, but there's like progress studies. There's a lot of people rethinking progress and talking to reframe progress and how do we actually generate this next 21st century kind of society, economy, future thing. And I think there's a lot more kind of focus is going to happen in the next 5-10 years on the positive kind of ramifications and getting the story right. And that is really what we need to do, is get a meta arching story that everybody can kind of see their future and their family's future in. And I think that'll go a long way. And we just need to start doing it.
Yeah, Nasreen.
Yeah. Just one comment on the connectivity and the SDG 17. I think we have to train all people in all sectors to use a nexus approach to consider the interlinkages between different sectors, mainly water, energy, food, to have these implications on each of the other sectors. And another issue, we have to train our children on imagination, to train them how to imagine the future, how to look into the future. In the Arab region, we are most prone to the past narratives, but how we train our children to be creative and imagine the future they think, and to have this open globe to think of the unthinkable and be creative. So this is the starting point to working with children and their narratives and training them on foresight. I think this is important in that regard.
Yeah, very much a key point. If you look at the cultural differences. Okay, Javi.
Yes. Yeah, I had a final thought here as well, because I feel education leads to community, and community leads to innovation. This is our systemic change model that we're working on at Future Food, and it's an emergent model. We didn't come up with it. It just naturally, over 10 years of our work, sort of came out, where we started with training and learning programs and learning experiences, and that ended up creating these shared knowledge communities at a local level. And then once you start studying a subject together, when you're learning about a subject together, you start co-creating together. And so the role of community building to create these innovations, and Living Labs, as the European Horizon Project you might know, is a massive sort of node in this this ecosystem, where Living Labs allow for it's an open space that allow for emergent innovation, emergent learnings to come out. So I think that also is going to play a key role in how we see these bottom-up innovations and culture shift that's going to happen. So the role of community there is super important, because again, change doesn't happen alone.
Great. I mean, it's also a good closing connection here, because we are looking to build a community around the Good Future Project, and it's very nascent. It has to percolate and become lively. But this is what we're working on, and we'll be doing another show hopefully in about 4 weeks, and we're going to start doing special episodes on food, on agriculture, on of course energy and green energy and all these topics. So if you have any ideas, just go to the project and send a message. I want to thank the speakers and the panelists, and thanks so much for being here. I know this took up quite a bit of your time here. And after all, it's Halloween in America, right? Of course, that's still the morning there. So I'm happy you weren't dressed up as a monster. So great to have all of you here. Thank you very much. And watch the film, TheGoodFutureFilm.com. Let me know what you're thinking. And if you have any ideas, please get in touch. And thanks for tuning in. Thank you, everybody. And goodbye. Talk to you later.